Hi, and welcome to this live reading from Talks Like Thunder, Read with Native Blood, Novella 1 by Randal Nerhus and Marjorie Carter. And this is presented by Itsy Bitsy Book Bits. Chapter 1, Arizona Territory, June 1871. As Desert Flower sank the clay pot into the glistening stream, she lost her grip and the current carried it away. She ran around a patch of sweetgrass, planted her foot into the stream, reached out and grabbed it. She tried filling the pot one-handed, as she always had, but it wobbled around, refusing to tip. Why is this thing so hard to fill? I would hate to get my bracelet wet. The pot continued to move and bob until she finally gave up and plunged it down with both hands. Something about the water bubbling and gurgling seemed like a kind of forewarning. Dismissing the thought, she heaved the heavy pot onto her hip, consoling herself that it was just too big for her. The aroma of the blooming sweetgrass, like the smell after a rain, made her smile. She strode up the bare stone path, ignoring her cramping stomach, and returned to her White Mountain Apache village. Happy that her people shared their food and provided shelter, she knew that even without parents, it was home. The rumble of horses driven hard ruptured Desert Flower's musings. A growing line of dust swirling above the treetops raced toward the village. 13 warriors swept into sight, heavily armed and painted for war. As they penetrated the settlement and halted their horses, dust filtered across the wickiups made of grass and brush. The riders gazed upon the villagers, their red and black faces so ferocious no one dared look them in the eye. The oldest warrior sat astride a huge white stallion painted with yellow marks of lightning. Bold red zigzags adorned the man's weathered face, and large silver hoops dangled from his ears. A turquoise-studded eagle-bone breastplate draped over his fine deerskin shirt, and wind tossed his thick black hair about his shoulders. Tiny silver bells, interwoven into the long fringe hanging from his sleeves, tinkled as he moved. Desert Flower gaped in wonder at the old man. Never in her 7 winters had she seen such an astonishing show of wealth. A riderless stallion pranced beside the old man. Its sleek black body shimmered in the bright sunlight, and its long tapered legs moved like those of an elegant dancer. The man dismounted in a whirlwind of grace and color, and hushed murmurs rippled through the crowd. He stabbed his lance into the ground with such force that snake rattles clattered and its eagle feathers danced. Facing the villagers, he declared, "I am Gray Fox, Nantan of the 3 Hills Chiricahua Apaches. I learned in a dream 2 sleeps ago that the life force of she who was my daughter-in-law has departed. I have come to claim the child belonging to her and to he who was my son." Desert Flower shuddered in terror. The pot slid from her hip, hit the bare stone, and shattered. Gray Fox surveyed the onlookers. "Where is your Nantan?" A village boy threw back the hide covering the entrance to Chief White Cloud's home. Gray Fox strode powerfully toward the lodge and disappeared inside. The Chiricahua warriors remained mounted, their dark, brooding eyes never leaving the crowd for an instant. As Desert Flower ran toward White Cloud's lodge, a memory came to her from years earlier when she had asked her mother about grandfather. "He does not come to us," her mother had said. "Your grandfather did not want he who was your father to marry outside of his people." Desert Flower stopped near the chief's lodge, stood close to the slanted wall of the branches, and listened. "Your granddaughter has strong medicine," she heard White Cloud say. "Many of our children suffered from the white man's rotten stomach, and Desert Flower alone survived. I wish to keep her. She might someday reveal the secret of her healing. Still, our village has so little food that I fear without a relative to provide for her, she might starve." "A wise man does not mistake what is for what he wishes to be," Gray Fox complimented. "I will take the child. She will never know hunger while there is breath in my body." "It is good," White Cloud said. "Too many of our children cry from empty bellies." Desert Flower froze. "I will never see my friends again. I should run and hide in the bushes along the creek, but what if the warriors find me? They will be angry and hurt me. Better stay here. I am not strong enough to fight them, but I could be someday." After a long pause, Gray Fox said, "I am grieved to hear this. Yet I do not understand why your people have no food in the season for growing." "For many seasons, the fever has ravaged our village," White Cloud explained in an anguished tone. Most of our men are dead or near dying. The few who can hunt bring back little game. That leaves us only that plant food the women and children can gather or grow. So I allow the white eyes passage through our land in exchange for food and blankets. Still, we never have enough for everyone. You would fall to the enemy without so much as a fight? Gray Fox interrupted, disgust in his voice. If I had not bargained with them, many of my people would have died. The white eyes are liars. They do not pass through our land. They have come to stay. Their sod huts grow like poison mushrooms in the forest. Every Apache knows they do not give. They only take. The white eyes must be very dangerous, Desert Flower thought. Mother had always kept me away from them. White Cloud gently replied, I have witnessed their foul lies too. This time it will be different, though, for the great white father in Washington has sworn on his black book. The white father's promises nourish the ears, not the stomach. The Chiricahua hunger for meat, not words. Are you White Mountain Apaches so different? No, we are all brothers in hunger, but 3 Star has marked his words on this paper. Desert Flower heard a rustling sound. Gray Fox snorted. See if that paper keeps the children from starving when the moon of hunger visits your village. Speaking of White Eye's gifts, who do you think gave your people the fever? Met with silence, Gray Fox's voice rose in anger. You should have sent a messenger to me before you conceded to the enemy. It was not an easy decision. We needed to unite from the beginning and fight them off together. Now it may be too late. Their weapons and numbers were far greater than ours, White Cloud calmly said. Other chiefs would have also have fought at our side. Now, because you did not fight, we might all fall and be forgotten. Whipping open the hide, Gray Fox emerged from the lodge. His eyes locked on Desert Flower, and he seemed to recognize her. She gasped, horrified. Run, a voice within her urged, but she could not. Cowering in fear, she backed away, but he snatched her up in his powerful hands. I want to stay here, she cried repeatedly as he carried her away, pinching her arms painfully and slinging her onto the big black stallion. The warriors steered their horses around, preparing to ride off. Desert Flower, wobbling on the stallion's moving back, found herself surrounded. Gray Fox pulled his lance from the ground and slid easily onto his mount, and the horses began walking. Stop, stop, I do not want to go, she shrieked. Gray Fox and his warriors whistled sharply, and the horses sprinted forward. Desert Flower lunged with her right hand and grabbed the stallion's mane while her rear vaulted back onto its hindquarters. As she pulled herself forward, she bounced again and nearly slipped off the left side. Pummeled by the horses jolting back, she clamped onto more of the mane with her left hand. Straining both arms, she brought her legs up under her. She wriggled ahead until her legs straddled the lowest part of the horse's back and regained her balance. Desert Flower gradually adjusted to the up and down flow of the stallion's gait. Her fists and arms aching, she looked for a place to hold higher on the mane, saw the earth speeding beneath her, grew dizzy, and squeezed her eyes shut. She drew deep, ragged breaths until the lightheadedness passed. Opening her eyes, she looked around. Behind her, to her dismay, the smoke from the village fires had receded nearly out of sight. Horror stories flashed through her mind of enemy tribes taking children as slaves. She remembered her mother warning her not to play beyond the village. If you are captured, you will never return. Desert Flower was so frightened she did not care when warm fluid gushed from her bladder, soaking her dress and the stallion's back. She begged the warriors to take her home, but they kept the horses at a full gallop. Before long, she grew hoarse and could no longer hear her own pleading. Giving herself over to total desperation, she wrapped her spindly arms around the stallion's neck and hung on for dear life. On and on they rode. The sun and wind burned her face and arms, and the constant grinding of her legs against the horse's back had rubbed her skin raw. Her stomach roiled in pain, and her muscles cramped from constantly trying to stay balanced on the horse's bouncing back. Father-son arced above them and began his descent. How far will they take me? Will this nightmare ever end? The Chiricahua warriors did not fear the faint-hearted White Mountain people, but Gray Fox, now aware of their alliance with the Bluecoats, considered the territory dangerous. Part of him actually hoped to come upon a small platoon of soldiers so he could acquire one of their new repeating rifles. But he would not risk a fight, especially while his only grandchild rode with him. His mood brightened once they entered Chiricahua territory. The warriors slowed their horses and began to tease one another. Gray Fox smiled over his shoulder. These hills are beautiful, do you not agree, Desert Flower? She scowled at him in silence, thinking how much she disliked her name, especially in the company of these warriors. Desert flowers are soft. I do not want to be soft and helpless. She stared at the untamed land, noticing the irregular green forested hills ahead. Yes, she responded hoarsely. She recalled how he had abused her throughout the day. Leaning forward, she hugged the stallion's neck and whispered in his ear, I hate this country and my grandfather too. I hate him. I hate him. I hate him. Gray Fox hurried them along as the sun sank toward the underworld. He wanted to reach Prairie Dog Creek before dark, an excellent place to camp. When they arrived, the men dismounted and walked along the creek, stretching their legs and bending their backs. Desert Flower stayed on her horse. Come on down, Gray Fox said in a pleasant voice. When she ignored him, he walked closer and softly told her again. She did not know how to dismount, so she remained sitting, her dark, explosive eyes fixed intently upon the distant hills. Not accustomed to such arrogance, Gray Fox grabbed her by the arm and tugged. When the swift jerk failed to unseat her, she kicked at him. His temper flared and he reached for her again. Grasping her waist, he wrenched her to the ground. Instantly, his face contorted and he hissed when he recognized the foul smell emanating from her clothing. He picked her up, paying no attention to her caterwauling, and dumped her into the shallow creek. Desert Flower wailed loudly enough to wake the ancients. The fierce-looking warriors laughed and covered their ears with their hands, attempting to protect themselves from her ear-busting screams. When she finally quieted, a young brave rose and began clapping his hands in appreciation of the show. Her voice is like thunder, the brave commented. On that, Soaring Hawk, we agree, Gray Fox smiled without humor. Chilled to the bone, Desert Flower waded out of the water and sat alone on the sandy riverbank. I hate Chiricahuas, she thought, sulking. She remembered the urge to run that morning. I will show them. I will wait until they are all sleeping, then I'll take the black horse and go home. Rubbing her sore buttocks, she remembered Chief White Cloud's concern for her. If I go home, I might starve. She would search out another tribe. Yes, she would find a small band that loved children. A respected warrior wearing at least 10 eagle feathers in his hair would live among them. He and his wife would adopt her. Desert Flower would astound the men and boys with her beauty and the women with her strength and wisdom. These people would bring her gifts of food and clothing decorated with exquisite designs. A tall, handsome brave would plead with her to marry him, assuring her that as the wife of the chief's son, she would have wealth and respect. Tangled in her make-believe, she failed to notice Gray Fox's approach until he draped a deerskin robe around her shoulders. She snatched it off, flinging it at his feet. What are you doing, child? He scolded. It gets cold in these mountains at night, and you will freeze in those wet clothes. Desert Flower shot him a quizzical glance. You just threw me in the creek. Why do you care about me now? Gray Fox ignored the outburst and handed her a rawhide pouch about the size of her hand. Come, small one, he said. Sit by the fire and have some of our pemmican. Spurred by hunger, Desert Flower glared at him as she grabbed the pouch. She followed Gray Fox to the fire, sat, and devoured the dried meat and berries. She listened to the warriors vying for prestige, telling tales of past battles and raids when they counted coup to show their courage. She knew warriors counted coup in several ways. One might touch an enemy in battle and escape unharmed, or steal his weapons or horses. She had never heard stories of such bravery and daring as these from the men of her own village. When her eyes grew heavy, she maneuvered herself closer to the fire. I can always run away tomorrow. Soon the night sounds faded, leaving Desert Flower in a world of soft silence. Sometime during the night, a mist fell, soaking her robe and chilling her bones. She pulled the robe tighter, wishing she were back in her village with her mother to keep her warm. Your mother is with the Star People, her spirit whispered, and you must learn to take care of yourself. The dark silhouettes of the sleeping warriors across the sodden camp contrasted starkly with the memory of her mother. Drawing a ragged breath, she summoned the loving memory by looking at the dim outline of her only piece of jewelry, a bracelet of various shades of turquoise. Mother was very ill. She spent many days carefully chipping holes through each berry-sized stone. She strung the stones together and tied it around my wrist. Mother, this is too loose for me. She smiled. You will grow into it. She died later that day. Desert Flower wept as she ran her fingers along the beads, remembering her mother. At last, sleep came to her. Father-son had just peeped over the edge of the earth when Gray Fox shook her awake. Groaning, she tried to stand. She trembled as pain seeped down her spine and spilled onto her legs. Gray Fox frowned and tried to help her to her feet. Are you sick? Genuine concern etched his face. I was sick, Grandfather, as Chief White Cloud told you, and now my back and legs are cramping from riding all day. She saw the nearby braves eating pemmican and listening. Gray Fox smiled. I thought you were eavesdropping on us, but why would it was my first time riding a horse, she cut in, speaking softly for fear the braves might hear and start laughing again. My village had few horses. We Chiricahua teach our children to ride horseback by their fourth winter. Also, Chief White Cloud spoke as if you had completely recovered. We needed to leave his land quickly, or Bluecoats might have seen us. Had I known the extent of your weakness, I would not have ridden so far without stopping to rest. Weakness? Desert Flower snapped. I will ride harder today. She hobbled toward the black stallion. The brave stopped eating and sat with puzzled looks. Grinning slightly, Gray Fox took his things and Desert Flower's wet robe, then told the others, Let us go. It seems she's ready to ride. Desert Flower stood on her tiptoes, clutching fistfuls of the horse's mane, ready to try to pull herself up when Grandfather appeared next to her. There is an easier way, he said, lightly placing his hand on her shoulder and drawing her away from the stallion. He stepped to a patch of tall grass, cut off a fistful with his knife, and returned. Speaking to the horse gently, he fed the grass, lowered his hand, and brought the horse's head nearly to the ground. He looked at Desert Flower. Come, press your legs against his neck and bend over it. She did so, and he held her elbow to steady her. As the stallion's head began to rise, Gray Fox said tenderly, Swing your leg around his neck and slide down. When she reached the animal's back, she began to slip off to the other side. Gray Fox tugged her toward him, centering her on the horse. He looked up to her. When you want to dismount, just grab his mane and lift your leg over his hindquarters. As soon as your feet swing down, let go of the mane and drop to the ground. Desert Flower tried not to grimace as her sore legs settled on the stallion's back. Her people's stories of children becoming slaves ran through her mind. Although she disliked the Chiricahuas, she could not bear the thought of becoming a slave. She must try to get along with these callous warriors. Gray Fox handed her another pouch of pemmican. Desert Flower grinned. Thank you, Grandfather. She took a bite and put the rest in her pocket. Gray Fox patted her knee. If you need anything, speak to me. Desert Flower's eyes smiled as she nodded. While they rode, the warm sun and light breeze dried Desert Flower's hair and dressed quickly. Feeling much better, she let her thoughts drift to her plan to run away. I do not want to go to a new tribe. They will not accept me, but I never had enough food in our village, and Grandfather is providing for me. She looked ahead and sighed. It is best to obey Grandfather and try to join his people. The sun had climbed high when Desert Flower saw the village from afar. Dome-shaped, thickly thatched wickiups stood everywhere, woven neatly amid a dense stand of cottonwood trees. As the riders drew nearer, a group of excited children surrounded by a pack of barking dogs ran out to greet them. Not far behind came the adults. Everyone seemed eager to meet the Nantan's granddaughter. The black stallion stopped at the edge of the village. Following Grandfather's instructions, Desert Flower grabbed the horse's mane and tried to dismount. She swayed down much faster than expected, and her momentum began to swing her up again. The stallion raised his head and whinnied. Sorry, my friend, she whispered and let go of the mane. She dropped to the ground and stumbled backward a few steps. Her tender muscles balled in pain as she brought herself back to balance and turned toward the villagers. People laughed at her clumsy dismount, but soon quieted. Many women stared at her, and children gaped as though she were a ghost. She met the gaze of a solemn-faced boy of about 11 winters. He was tall for his age, and his unusually dark gray eyes seemed to smile at her. Thankful for the kind look, she returned the smile. Desert Flower rubbed the big stallion's neck. Only the horse, Grandfather, and the boy seemed not intimidated by her status as the chief's reclaimed granddaughter. Frightened by the strange village, she could neither control her quaking limbs nor stop worrying thoughts from pecking at her mind. What if they do not accept me? She stared in the direction of the far-off white mountains and wished she still lived amid those ashen giants.